The letter from the HOA board arrived on a Tuesday, just like all the others, but this one was different. It wasn't about lawn height or mailbox colors. It was a special assessment for $500 from every homeowner, effective immediately. My blood ran cold as I realized the implications. They were bleeding us dry. Have you ever dealt with an unfair HOA or difficult neighbor? Share your experience in the comments. I'd love to hear it. My name is Robert Henderson, retired accountant and resident of Serenity Shores for the past 7 years. When my wife Eleanor and I first moved here, we thought we'd found paradise. Modest but well-kept homes, friendly neighbors, and a beautiful lake view from our back porch. We'd worked hard our whole lives, saved carefully, and this was our reward. Little did we know that paradise had a snake in its garden. The HOA board, led by President Richard Mercer and his cronies, had always been particular about rules. At first, it seemed reasonable, keeping property values up, maintaining standards. But over time, their demands became increasingly unreasonable, their fines excessive, and their attitude toward residents dismissive. What would you have done? In my place? Fight back or walk away? I tried to attend meetings, to ask questions about our finances, but was always met with vague answers or outright hostility. "Leave the finances to the experts, Robert," Mercer would say, with that condescending smile of his. "We have everything under control." But I knew something was wrong. After 40 years as an accountant, you develop a nose for numbers that don't add up. And the numbers at Serenity Shores weren't just not adding up, they were screaming foul. The breaking point came when our community dock, badly in need of repair, was declared too expensive to fix by the board. Yet somehow there was always money for Mercer's pet projects, new landscaping around his unit, repaving the parking lot nearest to his home, even a fancy new security system that seemed to benefit only the board members. I started digging, quietly. At first, requesting copies of budgets, invoices, and meeting minutes. At first, I was stonewalled. "We don't have to provide those," board member Patricia Wilson told me when I asked for the contractor information for the new landscaping. "Trust us to handle the community's money responsibly." Trust them? That ship had sailed. I had no idea. The next letter in my mailbox would change everything. It was an anonymous note slipped under my door one night. "Check the invoices for lakeside maintenance against the business license number. Then check who owns that license." It took some doing, but I found it. Lakeside Maintenance wasn't a legitimate company at all. It was a shell corporation registered to Richard Mercer's brother-in-law, and the $40,000 our community had paid for emergency repairs over the past 2 years. It had gone straight into Mercer's pocket. I was furious, but I knew anger alone wouldn't win this fight. I needed proof, and I needed allies. I started with my next-door neighbor, Martha Jenkins, a widow in her 70s who'd been in Serenity Shores since the beginning. When I showed her what I'd found, her hands shook. "I knew something wasn't right," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "But I never imagined. Robert, we have to stop them." Word spread quietly. A small group of us began meeting in my garage, going through documents I'd collected. We found more shell companies, more fake invoices, more money funneled to board members and their associates. In total, they'd stolen over $40,000 from our community. Confronting them directly would be pointless. They'd just deny everything. We needed legal help, and that meant money, something most of us didn't have in abundance. That quote when I remembered George Chen, a retired lawyer who lived 3 streets over. I approached him cautiously, not sure if he'd want to get involved. To my surprise, he was already aware of the problems. "I've been watching this for a while," he told me, "but without concrete evidence my hands were tied. What you have, that's different." George agreed to help us pro bono, drafting a formal demand for a full financial audit and threatening legal action if it wasn't conducted by an independent firm. We presented it at the next HOA meeting, and the reaction was exactly what we expected. "This is outrageous," Mercer sputtered, his face turning red. "You're accusing us of theft without any proof." "I have plenty of proof," I said calmly, holding up a folder. "Fake invoices, shell companies, money trails, it's all here, and if you don't agree to an independent audit, we'll take it to the state attorney's office." The room was silent. The other board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Finally, Mercer nodded stiffly. "Fine, have your audit, but you'll be embarrassed when it shows we've done nothing wrong." I had a feeling it wouldn't go that way. The false hope came 2 weeks later when Mercer called a special meeting. "In light of recent concerns," he announced, "the board has decided to voluntarily step down and allow new elections. We believe this is in the best interest of the community." It seemed too good to be true, and it was. While they agreed to step down from the board, they refused to allow the audit until after the transition, claiming it would be too disruptive. And they still controlled the community's funds. We pushed back, but they held firm. "The new board, who can decide on an audit," Mercer said with a smirk that told me everything I needed to know. I knew what was coming next. They would drain the accounts, destroy records, and leave the new board with nothing but debt and problems. "We need to act now," I told our group, "before they disappear with the rest of our money." George filed for an emergency injunction, freezing the HOA's accounts and preventing any further transfers without court approval. Mercer was furious, threatening to sue George for malpractice, for harassment, for anything he could think of. The court date was set for 3 weeks away. 3 weeks of living in a community divided, of dirty looks from Mercer's supporters, of sleepless nights wondering if we'd made a terrible mistake. The night before the hearing, someone threw a rock through my living room window. Attached was a note, "Drop it or else." I called the police, filed a report, but we all knew they wouldn't catch whoever did it. It was meant to intimidate me, to make me back down. What they didn't understand was that after 40 years of balancing books and finding discrepancies, backing down wasn't in my nature. The courtroom was packed on the day of the hearing. Mercer and his board members sat smugly at one table, while George, myself, and 3 other residents sat at another. The judge, an elderly woman with no-nonsense demeanor, listened carefully as George presented our case. "Your Honor," George said, "we have documented evidence of systematic embezzlement by the current HOA board. They've created shell companies, submitted fake invoices, and funneled over $40,000 of community funds to themselves and their associates. We're seeking not only a full forensic audit, but also criminal charges against those responsible." Mercer's lawyer objected vehemently. "These are baseless accusations made by disgruntled residents. There's no proof of any wrongdoing." George calmly produced document after document, invoice after invoice, connecting the dots between the shell companies and the board members. The judge's expression grew increasingly stern as she reviewed the evidence. "This is indeed serious," she said finally. "I'm ordering a full forensic audit of the HOA's finances for the past 5 years to be conducted by an independent firm. Additionally, I'm placing the current HOA board on administrative leave, with a temporary administrator to be appointed by the court." Mercer's face went pale. "You can't do this. We've done nothing wrong." "We'll let the audit determine that," the judge replied coolly. Court adjourned. The audit took 6 weeks, during which the tension in Serenity Shores was palpable. Mercer and his supporters maintained their innocence, while those of us who had fought for the truth waited anxiously for the results. When the report came back, it was worse than we'd imagined. Not only had they stolen $40,000, but they'd also mismanaged another $25,000 through unnecessary expenses and poor investments. The total damage to our community was staggering. The court-appointed temporary administrator called a special meeting to present the findings. The room was silent as she read through the audit report, detailing each instance of fraud and mismanagement. When she finished, the room erupted. Shouts of anger, cries of betrayal, and demands for justice filled the air. Mercer and his board members sat slumped in their seats, their smugness replaced by fear. "The court has been notified of these findings," the administrator said when the room quieted. "Criminal charges will be filed against those responsible. Additionally, a civil suit has been authorized to recover the stolen funds." The criminal case moved quickly. Mercer and 2 other board members were charged with multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. They pleaded guilty, hoping for leniency, but the judge showed no mercy. "You preyed on your neighbors, people who trusted you to protect their interests," she said during sentencing. "Instead, you stole from them for your own gain. There's no place in society for that kind of betrayal." Mercer received 3 years in state prison. The others received lesser sentences but still faced jail time and hefty fines. The civil suit recovered most of the stolen money, though not all of it. The new HOA board, which I reluctantly agreed to join as treasurer, implemented strict financial controls to prevent anything like this from happening again. The community. Dock was finally repaired, as were the other projects that had been neglected for years. Serenity Shores began to feel like the paradise we'd thought we'd found all those years ago. But the sweetest justice came about a year later when I received a letter from the state's Department of Professional Licensing. Richard Mercer, it turned out, had been a certified financial advisor before his retirement. His conviction meant he'd lost his license, his reputation, and his ability to ever work in the financial industry again. He, quote, "stolen from us to fund a lavish lifestyle. And in the end, he'd lost everything that mattered to him. I sometimes see him around town these days, a broken man working at a hardware store, stocking shelves and avoiding eye contact. I don't gloat. I don't even feel satisfaction anymore. I just feel sad that it came to this, that people who should have been looking out for their neighbors instead chose to prey on them. Serenity Shores is thriving now, with transparent finances and a board that truly represents the community's interests. Eleanor and I enjoy our lake views, our peaceful retirement, and the knowledge that we stood up for what was right. In the end, they buried themselves in their own arrogance. What's the sweetest justice you've ever seen?